Age assurance is everywhere. Around the world, legislators are exploring how to regulate age-restricted products and services online. The debate is moving fast, so fast that it can be hard to follow everything. A year ago around this time, the biometrics industry was still anticipating the effect that the UK's Online Safety Act would have on adult content sites. At that time, most people in the world probably hadn't yet heard the term age assurance, or at least hadn't seen it in international headlines. That's all changed. In December 2025, Australia introduced the world's first law restricting large social media platforms to users 16 and older. Since then, a groundswell of public support has prompted governments around the world to follow suit in making social media a 16 and up affair. I'm Joel McConvey. On today's episode of the Biometric Update podcast, we're going deep on age assurance regulation, what's happening where, what it means for organizations and individuals, and how changing laws are reflecting a bigger shift in public trust and the online ecosystem. First, we'll have a bit of a state of the nation, or nations in this case, on age assurance globally. Then, Biometric Update Managing Editor Chris Burt will be on hand to discuss the scenario in the UK, where the shifting political landscape has implications for digital verification service providers. It's the age of age assurance, and this is the Biometric Update podcast. For the sake of structure, we're going to start by looking at the different stages or phases that the online age assurance debate has moved through over the past years. The age of porn. First, there was porn. As early as 2019, online safety campaigners in Australia were pushing for measures to restrict kids' access to online porn streaming sites like Pornhub and Xvideos. I'm going to read an excerpt from a statement made to an Australian policy committee in 2019. It comes from Melinda Tankard, campaigns manager for the organization Collective Shout. What we've done is perform the most unethical experiment on young people and their sexual development, says Tankard. Age verification is a significant and necessary part of a multi-pronged approach to protecting children. Yes, we need other things, parental involvement and education, but this is a vital thing we need. Parents can't do this alone. That's sort of where it all started. From there, the regulatory momentum built gradually, and eventually, in July 2025, the UK became the first country to legislate age assurance for online pornography sites. Australia, too, first focused its legislative efforts on porn. But soon enough, its priorities shifted, and the Social Media Minimum Age Act became the focus, getting kids under 16 off social media to prevent them from being exposed to the potential harms that large social media platforms present. In December 2025, the law took effect. So began the second chapter of the online age assurance story, which has been unfolding ever since. The age of social. After Australia implemented its law, a slew of other countries followed its lead. The UK has just announced its social media minimum age law modeled on Australia's, which will take effect sometime in 2027. The EU is exploring a block-wide digital age of majority for social media use. In the US, social media firms are fighting dozens of legal battles on the state level to try and kill age assurance laws for social media wherever they come up. And countries as diverse as Indonesia, Bangladesh, and the UAE have floated regulations on social platforms. All of this has happened against a larger shift in public perception of major social media firms, which are facing legal challenges over their knowing failure to protect kids from the harmful effects that their platforms may present. Now, social media may be going the way of cigarettes, a pariah industry for which age regulation becomes commonplace. Now, beyond social media, dozens of other use cases are emerging, as different countries find ways to adapt age assurance tech to their own needs. Brazil, for instance, has focused its age assurance regime heavily on regulated online gambling. The UK keeps promising that soon, drinkers will be able to use digital ID for age assurance at the local pub. Chatbots are an emerging target for age assurance laws in several jurisdictions. And that's where we're at now. Chapter 3, if you will. Age assurance is an established fact, with an international standard and proven use cases around the world. For some, it remains controversial, but it is now a reality, and the question is not, do we need age assurance, or does it work, but what are the best age assurance tools for a given job? Truly, age assurance has come of age. Biometric Update is in the process of updating its online biometric age assurance market report and buyer's guide. In the process of doing so, I spoke with BU Managing Editor Chris Burt about the global changes in age assurance and asked him a bit about his own experience as a parent and if what he's observed lines up with the story I've just told. Here's my conversation with Chris. We've been looking at how the age assurance landscape has been changing in a regulatory sense, but also just in terms of its evolution. And I want to ask you later on about the UK, which is sort of a hot spot right now. But you and I have been discussing how, these kind of chapters are emerging almost in the story of age assurance. And that, this is something we may be looking at in an update to our age assurance report.
Yeah, it is. And, when we started covering, you and I started covering this area a couple of years ago, a lot of the discussion certainly was around pornography. People would bring up things like social media, but, the first legislation, as it came in Australia, that was really the first time that we'd seen it codified that way, right? And so my impression is that each different place is kind of choosing its own highest priority, and that there is some variance in those priorities from country to country. On this reading, then Australia is saying that social media is a higher priority, whereas the UK is saying pornography is a higher priority. But ultimately, ordering them in that way doesn't preclude, one country from expanding into an area that its neighbor or that a country on the other side of the world picked out as its top priority. So, in general, I think that the trend is pretty clearly towards individually targeted or discretely targeted areas, or kind of a limited application of the regulations in terms of what they're trying to restrict access to, but then subsequent expansion into all the other areas. Is that kind of the way you're seeing it as well?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, to me, the big pivot was social media. I feel like everyone began watching Australia right around the time of the technology trial, the age assurance technology trial, to see, how this would all unfold. And it seems that now what the evidence is showing is that it mostly is working if the platforms are following the law, and they're kind of not. So that's why it's not really working. But the point being, nothing catastrophic happened. And so people or countries have steadily just been, picking up that model, the UK in particular, and really moving with it. And it's been amazing to see the number of countries that have pursued social media legislation in a short period of time. So to me, I think, it's social media is the big, it's also easier to defend in a certain respect. Social media companies can say First Amendment, they can say free speech. It's a little harder to defend porn, so that one kind of just got slipped in, so to speak. But I think the big thing that's happening on the back of that is the larger regulation of the internet and the coming of age of a generation that understands the benefits of that rather than seeing it as a sort of like infringement. So I don't know if you feel that that's happening across the board in terms of regulatory regimes, but I guess more people are online more often, doing more stuff, and so the need for safety has become more apparent, I guess, to people.
That's an interesting way to put it, and I haven't really thought about it that much in terms of those attitudes that you refer to that at different ages. I know our children are we have children of similar age, and in their cases they wouldn't remember the Arab Spring,
Right.
which is seems in retrospect like a real touchstone, because that was at least my personal opinion is that was the high water mark for let's call it social media optimism, right? The takes about the potential social benefit of social media, and it's the way that it can potentially empower individuals, and in so doing empower entire groups of people to remake their society in a freer and more democratic way, or something like that, which is certainly something that that you and I can get behind, and that all these regulators in these democratic liberal democracies can get behind, at least.
Sure, yeah.
But then it's interesting, as you say, that it's not necessarily considered an encroachment for younger people who I guess have grown up surrounded by more of the, like you referred to now we have a little bit of data about how age assurance works. I think we could say the same thing if we go back just a little bit in time about how social media works and what its impacts are, right? I mean, so our kids have grown up in an environment in which if you or I are reading, just regular consumer news, we come across, studies done by think tanks or universities or whatever about, the potential benefits and the potential harms of social media. We hear about spectacular cases of violence or self-harm or something like that, and so there's the cautionary tales, have been part of our kids' experience of social media the entire time in a way that doesn't apply to anybody who's older than them, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. I remember someone referring to it to me as the anxious generation. And, if you think about it, this generation grew up with a camera constantly on them. Whether or not it's on, you're staring down a camera anytime you're staring down your phone. And everything about surveillance and public image and stuff, I think, factors into all this. And I do think it's changing. I still don't love being on camera, whereas I think that's just not a viable position for any young person using social media.
Yeah, and at the same time, I know that we talked about, or you mentioned beforehand that we wanted to talk a little bit about what social media use looks like in our house, and so I have two kids who are just far apart enough in age that their social media life is concretely different. It is significantly different, even to the extent that if Canada is to, they would have to, break records for it, relative to its own track record for moving fast. But in theory, my younger child could be impacted by this legislation that's on being proposed now. They would have to implement it much more quickly than they normally do things, but it is kind of a going thing for his age group. Whereas the older one, is well beyond all of that, and so my limited experience with those differences from one age group to another is that is actually away from the image-based socials. I'm thinking Snap, I'm thinking Instagram, thinking TikTok, and towards text-based, which is interesting because my younger child's not on X, but that is part of the appeal there is it's text first, and text and images kind of
right
platform. But it really it's that use, and I do think that there may be a male female social difference going on there too. But a lot of it for my younger child is just about the ability to communicate in an environment where people don't have home phones and people don't write letters to each other. What they do is send texts, they send messages, and so therefore, there becomes a social pressure to be on the platform just so that you can have any kind of communication.
That's interesting. I was just thinking that my first social media platform was probably ICQ. So it may be time to bring back ICQ. Just yeah. Oh boy. Yeah,
we're dating ourselves, Joel.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that's a reference only some of you will know. I think there's a fascinating situation happening in the UK where we have a prime minister who's been cast aside, a new one coming in, and then this sort of hovering specter of maybe a change in government should Mr. Farage get his way. And I wonder, the age assurance stuff wasn't necessarily directly tied to the digital identity program that Keir Starmer had been developing. But I wonder, is age assurance, do you think, destined to become a sort of political bargaining chip? Is this something where Farage may come in and say, I'm going to tear this all down because, it's easy for me to make it a wedge issue by saying it violates privacy. Is there danger of this happening? What do you know about, the incoming leadership and how they intend to deal with all this?
In a sense, not too much, because my impression is that reform has not really laid out a comprehensive policy where online safety is concerned, and so what we end up with is a political landscape that we can see a little more clearly, which is split, right? Which is divided. There are a lot of people in the UK who are very concerned about their privacy rights and about their speech rights. And there are a lot of people in the UK who are concerned about, online safety for children. And so, the relative size of those two camps surely depends at least a little bit on what specifically is being proposed. And I do. You referred to, the connection or lack thereof between the digital ID scheme and the OSA Online Safety Act stuff. I suspect that if you pulled those two things apart, that not just I don't mean in terms of making them, gating one off from the other in policy or in regulation, but I just mean in the public mind, right? In perception, when you're talking to people on the person on the street about how comfortable they are with age restrictions on the internet, if it's not possibly connected to a Brit card, I think there are going to be a lot of people who are happier about that, and one of the implications of that would be that if you are an incoming government and you scrap the one program and then you may face more opposition trying to scrap the other. In other words, age assurance might be safer as a policy position politically if you get rid of all the Starmer, Brit card stuff. Right. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think, thinking through it, actually, the fascinating thing about age assurance legislation is that it may not actually matter who's in power, because it seems actually to have broad bipartisan support. One of the few issues where people mostly have said, regardless of politics, at least in public surveys or whatnot, consultations, yes, we think this is a good idea, at least in principle. And you have a lot of pushback from privacy advocates and some from civil rights advocates, but a lot of the pushback comes from social media and its sort of legal engines. And so I think ultimately this probably will be dictated by political popularity. And so that doesn't seem to be a tough sell just about anywhere in the world to the general public from a political perspective.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I think that the majority of people say, when directly asked, yes, they want restrictions placed on the online world in order to increase the safety of children. I think that one of the implications of that is that if is that for an incoming government, whether that's reform in the UK or another government in another country, if they try and walk back online safety regulations, they're probably going to be forced sooner or later to explain what they're going to do instead. And that, I mean, there is, I think, a pretty obvious political hazard there for a party that's getting rid of safety regulations. It could, and you would think that any skillful opposition would link that to the lobbying efforts that you just referred to by those companies, and essentially say, here you go, your government is caving into big tech and, doing the bidding of their corporate masters. And I think politicians generally don't like to be characterized that way, with good reason. So, so that would make it politically dangerous to unravel policies, even if the details of those policies aren't that popular. To just walk them back without replacing them with something better or that you can sell as better seems highly risky.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, maybe the big takeaway here, and it's not a surprising takeaway, but it really continues to sort of assert itself, is that this is not going away. This isn't a flash in the pan. This is a larger movement, and it's not likely that, someone's going to be able to Thanos a switch and say, oh, this has all gone away. The seed is planted, the discussion is happening at many levels of government. So we're basically in the age already of regulated social media and certainly regulated age-restricted services and products online.
I completely agree, and I think that ties back around to what we were talking about sort of at the beginning, which is that, I think that, I know that I was surprised at not this past Age Assurance Standards Summit, but the previous running, and you and I talked a little bit about this at the time, but, I was struck by the extent to which you'd have all these representatives from different countries in the room, and they'd talk about, how to make age assurance work and how, the extent to which it can be considered accurate or something like that cuts across different use cases. And then, the conversation would switch to maybe the particulars of a given regulated area. And you might have one government say, well, because pornography, blah, 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 blah. And then the country sitting next to them might say, well, we're not concerned about pornography because, for instance, they may say, well, it's illegal in our country anyways.
Right.
So we don't care about that. But where we're applying it is, say, gambling. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we have some similar concerns about how the technology works. Is it accurate, et cetera? But then some different things based on the different use case. So then the country next to them would have another priority where they say, well, we're not concerned about gambling in our country, but we have absolutely gotten the message from the people who live in our country that we must address X, we must address Y. And so it was like if you went around the room, there wasn't a strong consensus with everybody saying we all need to ban this certain thing or block kids under 18 from doing this certain thing and do so in the same way. But they all had something that they wanted some kids to stop doing or do less of.
Yeah. And those things I'm sure will continue to proliferate. So we'll see where it all goes. Thank you for your time today, Chris, and for sharing your insights. And it's certainly a fascinating sector to cover right now. And I'm sure when we do our next age assurance special, there'll be a whole different ballgame already.
Absolutely, it's been a real pleasure, and I'm looking forward to those next discussions as well.
Biometric Update has been following the age assurance story since the beginning, and will continue to do so. So in the meantime, thanks to Chris for joining us, and thanks to you for listening. And remember, you can always find your daily dose of biometrics and digital identity industry news at www.biometricupdate.com.